It was a cheat day. I ate them with a bun. Funny how your idea of a party changes when you get older. Ooh, I'm
Get to have the bun.
Have them with a bun. Ooh, crazy.
Yes. They always say you used to, when you're younger, you sneak out to the party, and now when you're older, you sneak away from the party.
Away from the party. My son did say he came in late, and he did say that he was thinking that he'd find me laying on the floor drooling on myself in a diabetic coma. Yes, because of the carbohydrate consumption. Half-eaten piece of cake rolling out of my mouth. It wasn't that bad. Yeah, it was. It was actually pretty bad.
The recording.
We went to Duluth I drove to Duluth. So I drove 2 hours north to get a milkshake. That's how desperate the situation was.
Was that a $5 milkshake?
It's more than $5.
To quote the
If it comes from a shop, if it comes from a shop that's the size of 2 people, that's only for milkshakes, that's a bad sign. And there was a 35-minute wait.
Oh wow.
Where'd you go for that?
What was that?
Where'd you go for that?
There's that milkshake place up in Duluth, just past Fitger's.
Mm.
And that's all they do is they make milkshakes. But yeah, there was a huge wait for it. No parking, huge wait. I drove around the block twice. Then I parked. I just drove up on the sidewalk and parked and decided I didn't care. I have a black Ford Explorer, so everyone thinks I'm a cop anyway. It's parked on the sidewalk. Rolled the dice. It worked. Whatever. All right.
I'd say go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Good to see you. Welcome to the Power Lunch. We have an hopefully interesting session today with Paul Barrett, resident expert.
Resident expert.
That's just the title, resident expert and founder. We don't say resident expert of what, we just say resident expert. And we're going to talk a little bit about cloud information and cloud stuff, and really not so much cloud like specific technology, but more like cloud solutions and different options and what they mean, and kind of benefits and challenges, because each solution kind of has its pluses and minuses. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that and get some input on that. So I don't know, it looks like everybody, we all kind of know each other like a big happy family, but Paul, do you want to go over a little bit? I mean, I'm the dancing monkey. Nobody cares what I think, but Paul, maybe you want to go over a little bit about who you are and what your opinion plus $2 will get you a cup of coffee, what that means.
Sure. Who is Paul Barrett?
I usually ask why is Paul Barrett, but let's go with who is Paul Barrett here.
Yeah. Well, I've been doing IT, and it keeps on rolling every year. Every year Keith gets older, I do another year of IT. So it's 31 years of IT, which is kind of crazy when I get to that point.
Jeez, you're old.
Yeah.
You've been doing IT longer than most of our staff has been alive.
Yes. I always used to say, without IT, I'd be a bum, because I don't know what else I actually could do. I don't know what other skills I have. That's all I've been doing is IT.
You'd be selling brats at Lambeau Field.
I don't know if I could do that either.
I know I couldn't do it. I don't have the size for it.
Yeah, through my journey, I've kind of latched on to this whole storage and virtualization becoming a passion of mine. After 15 years of doing the round and round with servers and Microsoft and all those kind of wonderful things, I discovered VMware and storage and just become a passion of mine of understanding how to cram 10 things in a 5-pound bag, and at what point is it overloaded? And I still keep on doing that and doing that for customers, and I love it.
Yeah, no, it's we kind of share a common thread or common passion of helping customers solve problems with technology, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good info. Man, you're old. All right.
And
So
it was your birthday. You're the one.
yeah, right. I'm
But
just
you-
older.
Aren't you, sir?
So, Paul, one of the things that, we maybe as a baseline, talk a little bit about what you would, how do you define or how would you describe, public cloud, private cloud, and maybe hybrid cloud? Maybe you could kind of talk about that a little bit to start with as a baseline.
Sure. My viewpoint, I mean, there is fantastic uses for, the public cloud, and, how public cloud is defined. It's, scalable and elastic. So that is the workload you want to put on that environment. You want to be able to put, hey, I have a concert coming up. I'm going to sell out in 45 minutes. I want to be able to sell those tickets rapidly without, crashing the site, that kind of thing. So that you have to be able to build your application to accommodate that big influx of usage, all at once, like boom. And that's a great use for your public cloud. That's elastic.
Mhm.
What we do here at NetVPro is more in what most people's workloads aren't that elastic part. It's very consistent. You have maybe a spike at the end of the month. And that's why when we do sizing statistics, we take a whole month's worth and we wait for, the end of the month, the reports, the executives always want the reports, and so we want to be able to size for those peaks. So, we're not getting people complaining that, hey, the system's slow, end of month, beginning of month, whenever that peak hits your company.
One of the things I run into a lot when I'm talking to people is some confusion around the cloud, and maybe talk a little bit about like cloud technology and what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean, when we talk about the cloud, that doesn't need to mean Amazon or Azure, those types of things necessarily. And talk about the cloud relative to just the technology involved, and kind of from a high level, how we can describe the cloud. I have a sense of it. I'm just wondering how you would articulate that. Well,
Yeah.
like from my perspective, when I think about the cloud and when I'm talking to people, they only think about those big public cloud spaces. But really, when we talk about cloud technology, we're talking about storage with virtualization, and automation, those types of things. And that can be in a public cloud, that can be in a private cloud, that can be in a hybrid. And I'm just wondering, do you agree with that way of thinking about it, or is there a different way to think about what the cloud is or can be?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. And, and I do think about it a little differently, of course. So part of it is, where a lot of the technology is going is software as a service. So it's like, okay, nobody cares about how many gigawatts and gigawatts, and we do because we're geeks, but
Not everybody's as entertained by it as we are.
I mean, at the end of the day, what they want is, their application, their needs are being met, and it doesn't matter how it's being met. So, and that's the big draw to software as a service. So if you look at, what Microsoft has done with Office 365, instead of having an on-prem Exchange server and email, it gets bounced all over, and you're like, hey, are you there? And hey, are you there? It's like, oh, okay, well, we're just going to host all the servers, as all the services, and you just log into a portal, and voila, you got your mail flowing from one customer to another. And and it's a pay as you go model versus hey, I have to pay 20 grand for hardware, another 10 for licensing. Let's get a professional service to get this set up. You're in for, a big upfront cost, and then maybe your long-term cost maybe be a little less. But what these vendors have been doing is like, no, we'll just set it up, we'll host it, we'll do everything for you. You just pay us a subscription every month, pay as you go. And
Well, some businesses are, we mentioned software as a service, but even thinking about in cloud technology giving you the ability to do hardware as a service, because some organizations get kind of tired of dealing with I need to buy servers and storage and this stuff. I'm on a 3-year treadmill of buying stuff and having to go through assessments and this and that. And really, they just want to have a certain level of performance, a certain level of compute. By having, you don't really necessarily, it's a little bit more controllable in a private cloud environment, but that software as a service, one thing, but isn't infrastructure as a service almost another version of that?
Yeah, and we've been doing a lot of that. I mean, we've ran across where people are shutting down their offices because of COVID. We've gone through this acceleration of the digitized acceleration, and people go, well, how much do I really need that office now that it's just an expensive place to put my servers? So why don't I move those servers into a colo? How better yet, rather than moving the actual hardware, let's just move the virtual servers into a hosting provider. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today a little bit more. And I'll go ahead and share my screen. So here at NetVPro, I'm just going to jump into it. We have 3 data centers, one in Rockford. Oh,
You can't see your screen. There we go.
There we go. Sorry.
There we go.
I got to move my thing. So we have 3 data centers. I'll pop up. So we got the Rockford. This is where we're doing our hosting for our new customers, because we started off as a DR as a service company 11 years ago. And from there, I've always been, an eye on, hey, at what point do customers want to, exactly what Keith was talking about, stop the merry-go-round of, it's 3 to 5 years, we need to upgrade our environment. But in reality, they shouldn't have to be worrying about the hardware. That should be somebody else's problem. And so we want to take on those issues. And so what we're doing in Rockford is we set up a highly available cluster. And on top of that, we're actually backing up to another cluster. So in case, it's all about redundancy, quick recovery. How can we handle that? And so I wanted to have operational maturity before we got into this. And last year when COVID hit, and now when people are abandoning some companies, if it makes sense for them, especially NetVPro is, I'm kind of rambling on, but there's reasons to close your office and move your servers into a colo, and then there's reasons not to. And we just go through that assessment if it makes sense or not. But a lot of companies right now are saying, I just want my application to run from wherever I am. However, how can I do that? And first thing we do is we check on the vendor and say, hey, we use QuickBooks Online. I'm not going to host QuickBooks. I'm going to let them do it. Is that vendor prepared and can handle hosting that software as a service on their environment?
Go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, part of what we talk about is the benefits of the flexibility and those things, but also one of the things that people sometimes overlook is the savings around not having to cool their own data center, not having to power their own data center, those types of things too.
Well, and you guys are, we're coming up on hurricane season. You guys are coming through,
Snow-a-cane season.
No, the storm season, April showers bring May flowers kind of thing,
And power outages.
So it's like, okay, have you tested your UPS? How long can your UPS run? How long can you be without power, before it starts affecting production and performance and delivering your solution to your customers? That's what makes you money.
And that's kind of the nice thing about having the cloud solution in place, or having that virtualized infrastructure in place. Is, in a past life, I very vividly remember standing at the loading dock door with 200 employees behind us, looking out the door with the power out, observing the aftermath of straight line winds, thinking, man, at some point we got to get a generator. You know what I mean? But have that ability to have a data center, have your stuff, have your gear in a data center that works, right? That infrastructure is there, has a value add to it too. Or not.
Or not. No, and that's exactly right. And that's why, when we set it up and we started accepting customers, because one, we focus on DR as a service, bringing people back up from an event. Now, since we're hosting people's environments, now we have to focus on, being up as much as we can, figuring out how do we get them, replicated, their data protected. I just finished reading a book that was, how they say the world is going to end. A new author, spoke about why there's so many hacks and exploits nowadays. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, we've all known that there's, the bad guys have ramped it up, and they keep ramping it up. And part of it is, maybe I'm going to go off topic here. Part of it is, people are paying the ransom, and it's like, well, if you pay the ransom, you're funding them to attack more of us out here and making it worse for everybody, So it's like, don't pay the ransom, figure out how you can recover yourself, even if it is more painful and it is more costly.
Well, I think security is definitely an aspect of it. And like, sometimes when we do the assessment, depending on what that customer's needs are, you think about if they have a specific security environment, maybe a public cloud, even though flexible, is not the most secure space, but they can still, because sometimes they think they can't use cloud technology, but they can do a private cloud, right? And have access to the security they need in a private cloud or hybrid cloud space.
Right.
And that, that's one of the benefits to that ability of thinking about the cloud as technology, not necessarily a certain place. Because if you have HIPAA requirements or PCI requirements, those types of requirements that are either legislatively enacted or professionally in your industry required, being able to leverage the private cloud technology gives the ability to take advantage of scalability, flexibility, security, all those things that maybe the public cloud doesn't give you from a security perspective, because it's, with a public cloud, it could be hosted on, 4 data centers anywhere in the US, you don't really know, or even overseas, which if you have a requirement, from Homeland Security, that you have your stuff in the US, you want to make sure it's not hosted overseas. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious. How do you handle DR recovery in, I guess you guys do a private cloud for the most part. How would that process work? And the other question I have, the second part being, back when I was doing more of the stuff that you're doing, VMware was it. And then other players were trying to come in and get a piece of that pie, whether it was Citrix or whoever. And I don't know if VMware is still the big dog in town.
From our perspective, VMware is still the big dog in town. And when you talk about recovery, it really depends on the situation. We always do on-prem, and like I said, with our environment that we started hosting, we built a whole separate cluster for just our backup environment in order to recover the primary environment in case something goes wrong. I mean, and one of my stories I tell is, how did I get so backup fanatical? Why am I so focused on backup? And here's my story. I took over. I was a small printing company, but it was my first. I'm in charge of everything kind of shop. 300 people. 10, 11 servers, and the outgoing IT guy tells me, he's like, yeah, make sure you make your backups run. Keep an eye on your backups. I'm like, okay, got him, old guy, get out of here. I'm gonna revamp the whole environment. I'm gonna virtualize some stuff. I'm gonna do all this cool stuff. And as I'm going through and upgrading and making the new environment, compliant and faster and better and all these wonderful things, one late night, I'm a new father. I adopted my daughter, and I'm working 4 to 8, 4 10s to make sure everything's running smoothly. And so I have a lot on my mind and a lot going on and a lot of responsibility and right at a certain point, I'm doing the Exchange upgrade and the hard drive failed. Or the server environment failed, but I had a new server built, so I'm like, no big deal. Tried to port it over, it didn't work, so I'm like, oh, no big deal, I'll just go to my backups, and the backups didn't run for 2 weeks. So about 3 a.m., I'm thinking it's time to update my resume, and
That's when you get that little feeling in your stomach that
that feeling that you get gut punched and your stomach drops through, and it's like, yeah, I don't like living through that, and luckily enough, in 2000, yeah, I was able to recover the data and get them back up and running. And people came in at 7 o'clock in the morning. They look at me and they're like, you kind of look like hell. I'm like, yes, but you have your email. You have all your email. I was able to get the data pulled over from an old hard drive that there's, I think God kind of transcended that personal moment, right? That point and said, here's a foreign import utility. I've never seen that in any screen ever, like foreign import. I pushed the button, the data was there. It was like, from then on, I abhor, and luckily we have a guy named John Anderson on our team that has my fanaticalism about backups. So there we have it.
Yeah, well, backups don't matter until they matter, and then they really matter, right?
And then they really matter.
And they really matter. Yeah, how many of us old guys have been through that where it's like, oh, you do have that moment of oh poop. We'll say oh poop.
So that's a long answer to your question, Ken. But the other part is we actually recover people right into our data center if we need to. So we've done test DRs. We encourage our customers to do tests all the time. And from there, we had recently had a customer. Hopefully we can get him on one of these power lunches to tell his story. And we were able to push his data back onto a host, and we were able to do that and just bring a whole physical machine back to him. He could plug it in and just turn his machines back on.
I think one of the nice things with either whether it's private, public, or hybrid cloud is that ability to test DR and DR scenarios without impacting production necessarily. You have the ability to find out what's going on. I mean, how many times have we spun up a DR test, and found out that it wasn't actually backing up the information it needed to back up, or it wasn't doing it in the right way? I think one of the things that I've seen, whether it's in my past lives or my current life, is that with every DR test, we learn something, right? We learn something that's important to the process. And, whether it's, like I said, whether it's hybrid, public or private cloud, the leveraging of cloud technology and the ability to do that testing is hugely important. And I think the other thing that's a great benefit is that, should you have a disaster, should you have an event, I don't even like to say a disaster. So should you have an event, you have the ability to not be limited by geography. So if you're in the Midwest, or if you're in Florida where you could be destroyed by a hurricane, or Midwest by a tornado, the proverbial killer tornado, or even let's even talk about everybody's got the hoochie flu, whatever you got going on there, and people can't come into your building. You're not limited by geography. You can still, your business can still operate, from a remote data center or any other kind of event that happens, even in the event of malware, right? You have that virtual infrastructure, that cloud-based infrastructure. You have the ability to recover from that if you've been creative and thoughtful in your processes and you've built it for that. But if you're in a physical space, you don't necessarily, not everybody has replicated servers sitting on the floor that they can just throw into service. So the ability to use that cloud technology, whether it's public or private or hybrid, is lends a whole bunch of flexibility to a business. So I don't, Paul, do you have any other stuff? I guess I do have a couple of questions that I had prepared. Like if you're a business that's heavy on transactional type processing, where do you see the best performance? Are you better off to have a data center full of physical servers, or does the ability to use the cloud technology actually make you better if you're pushing a lot of transactions?
It really depends on your application. Make sure, that's what people talk about all the time is, well, we moved our stuff to a cloud. Well, that's called lift and shift. You haven't rewrote the application to utilize the cloud technology to be more efficient. You just moved from one place to another, but you have to optimize and rewrite the application. We're working with a company. I mean, it's a 5-year process to rewrite their applications to utilize the cloud technology in the right way. So, we're currently, maintaining all their physical servers and working on the process to get them all virtualized.
Does anybody from the audience have any questions? Anything else? Ken had a good question. Anybody else have any questions or anything they'd like to ask Paul or myself? Obviously, I'm the good looks. He's the brains.
I mean, back when all this cloud stuff first came out and I was still running an IT department, there was always a concern, like my data's going where, and a lot of people at my age level had that feeling, but that seems to have gone away. And now it's just more accepted that, yes, this cloud technology is the future. And if you're not on board, you're going to get left behind or have lots of problems.
I think that's actually a really interesting question because, Ken, I do see that too, where like there's certain people in leadership positions where it's like, we're going to cloud. Cloud is it? Cloud, that's happening. But then there's other guys who are kind of like, there are other people that are kind of, they're asking a few questions. And I think that's a good thing to do because it depends, like Paul had said earlier, it really depends on that vertical or that business that you're in. Does it make sense to be fully in that public cloud? You have concerns because I mean, even think about earlier this week, people are in the cloud, Microsoft is hosting their stuff. Well, there's a little bit of an outage. And all of a sudden, I'm sure help desks all over the US lit up because they weren't able to access their Teams things and documents in SharePoint and whatnot. That's kind of something that happens in the cloud that we need to know about and understand that when you do, everybody has issues, right? I mean, computers are still machines, issues exist. Amazon has them, Microsoft has them, those things still happen.
My answer to that nowadays would be compare the ability to, if you're a small business and you're like, no, I want to keep everything on my prem, and then you have a problem. Well, you have a very small ability to respond to that problem, whether it's human resources, financial resources. But if you're in some type of cloud and something goes wrong, you have a much greater pool to draw from that's working to get that back up and running.
Right. Right, and that's where that kind of that question of flexibility comes in, and like you said, being able to draw from that bigger pool of resources. So I think, and the other thing to understand, think about what the cloud do is if you need to get your information back, is it the Hotel California where you can get the information there, but you can never leave? So that's kind of one of the things to think about is what does it mean to you if you need that data back or if you need to change providers, because it can be very simple to get the data pushed to the cloud, but then moving it to a different provider or extracting it for your own purposes can be a difficult and costly endeavor.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, I think that you're right. There, and we're kind of still in it. There's a period where people were just like, move to the cloud. Don't even ask questions, move to the cloud. And now I see, and people I'm talking to, I see a little bit more of a thought pattern going around. Does it make sense? Or are there elements of my business when you think about hybrid? There are things that it makes sense to have in the cloud, and there's other things that maybe it makes sense not to have in the cloud. So there's that process going on now more than I think before. But I also think Paul brought up a good point. COVID pushed a lot of that, right? COVID helped people realize that leveraging cloud technology allows that work from home thing to happen. I see a lot in the medical space, right, with HIPAA requirements.
I was going through a Sarbanes-Oxley audit, I guess, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago now, when the company was going public. And this was a few years after going public. And they came in and one of their questions was, what would you do if there was a pandemic? He's talking specifically to the IT department. And everybody's looking at pandemic. And the vice president of the department's like, gosh, if I lose 3 people, I've got a pandemic on my hands. But now, how about that? And that was a long time ago that they were posing that question.
Yep. But we have a couple of text questions. Quick, do you find security and compliance requirements for PCI, HIPAA, et cetera, being an issue for cloud and private cloud? You want to take a swing at that, Paul, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I only can really talk about private cloud, and private cloud really is, we have controls in place that log every one of our changes. And that's the big thing is, knowing when your changes are happening, change control, when something happens.
I think that if you're in an environment that requires a high degree of control and those types of things, that the private cloud is a more controllable managed space than the public cloud. You can be, I think I always think about, I don't know if anybody remembers Kim.com, the Kim.com data centers. And if you remember, he got in trouble, some kind of legal issues. I don't know what it was, but the government came in and shut down his data centers. They didn't care whose stuff he was hosting. They didn't care any of that. They shut down the stuff. They ripped the servers out of the rack and they took them back to, the bat cave. And the problem is that he had businesses running there that had nothing to do with the problems that were associated with the reason the FBI was there taking stuff out of his data centers. So I think that to me that was a horrific thing. So to me, that's always something that's in the back of my head and to think about and consider, is that something that we need to contemplate?
Yeah, just as recently, you can look at Powerlunch, where Amazon decided to shut them out. They were stuck. I mean, they were off the grid for, 2 months, 3 months.
Another question, do you find companies moving to Azure and or AWS or software as a service cloud for each software vendor or to an MSP like something like NetGain, which is the cloud organization, or similar, or some kind of a hybrid?
Yeah, we see everybody moving everywhere. I mean, we got customers moving to Azure, we got customers moving to AWS, we got customers moving into our data centers. I mean, and I'm always looking at vendors for software as a service, because it makes a lot of sense if the vendor has their stuff together. And that is a big question. What brought me, I think Ken kind of helped me formalize this is vetting your software vendor that's hosting your data. You know, I mean, we all kind of accepted Microsoft saying they're going to do what they do, and we're not going to vet Microsoft. But, you know, we should, you know, if you're looking at a smaller provider, let's say an ERP software, you know, that should be vetted and ask the questions like, how would you handle, you know, a crypto attack? How long would it take you to get back online? What is your DR plan? What is your security plan? How are you handling these things? You know,
Well, and I think that in organizations where HIPAA applies, they've achieved some benefit to moving to those organizations, software as a service that are, you know, medical records providers, because, you know, then they need to worry about their secure connection to that provider, but they don't need to worry about all of those things necessarily that HIPAA has. They cover it with a business associates agreement, and you know, that provider provides them with attestation that they're doing the things that they should do, you know, and so that vendor takes on a degree of responsibility when it's software as a service, you know, Epics and those types of places in the world.
You guys find a lot of people question you into these things, or is it just an assumption I'm going to move to the cloud and then everything's going to be fine, or is there like detailed conversations that the clients are having?
Well,
I'm gonna let Keith take that one.
well, I was gonna, yeah, I didn't know if, what I was gonna say is that, to me, a shocking number of organizations don't ask the questions,
Wow.
and they just kind of go with it, and you know, part of the, a lot of times part of the role that I play is just being on the call to ask the questions, ask the right questions, so they can,
Mhm.
you know, are you HIPAA compliant or are you HIPAA aligned, or do you know what HIPAA, you know, do you know what the acronym is? You know, and but a lot of organizations are just going, "Yeah, we're just going to do it. Take care of, we're going to do it," but they don't really ask the question sometimes. So I think that if your organization, or if you're part of an organization that doesn't necessarily have a deep technical pool, sometimes it's good to just get a resource in there to help ask those types of questions. Oh, you're HIPAA compliant. You know, how do you handle your hard drives? How do you handle your old copy machines? Do you have security things on those machines? Do you have, how are you hardening your servers? You know, and when they start asking those questions, they
I guess that's where you guys can come in and bring more value than just say an AWS who's just going to take your money and just slap it
that's
up
where that
there.
value comes in, because if you're the provider, the service provider, you're still responsible for your business associates, right?
Mhm.
So and a lot of places don't realize that. They think they're just shifting responsibility, but they're still responsible for their business associates and their security practices. So it is important to have that conversation and to understand what their various practices are. Like when people talk about HIPAA and things like that, it's, you know, my question is always, what does compliance mean to you? You know,
Yeah.
I was just reading, there's another cool question here. Always been concerned running on a public cloud provider where it may be virtualized on a shared host just because of the kin.com potential. With private cloud, do you have clearly device perimeters, clear device perimeters where and how access is made to your client services, and are those accesses audited? So, you know, how would you handle like a multi-tenant type of an infrastructure type of an organization? I think those types of questions. Do you want to take a swing at that one, Paul?
Sure. So what we do is we actually virtualize and then virtualize again. So we have a virtual host sitting actually on a virtual host, and then we give access to that environment to that customer now that it's virtualized on top of that. That gives us a lot more granular control. And then that way, you know, they have complete control of that environment, and we, you know, and then the other part is we set them up with their own external IP and their own firewall. So that's, you know, it's completely separated. So there's no possibility of people jumping from one and getting from one customer to another. They only can see their stuff, and that's all they can see. We haven't been asked to audit any of our information as of yet, but that is a good question. I think I know a couple security guys that could audit our environment and check.
And it would, and those types, that type of configuration would be auditable. You would have the ability to see who has access, the level of access, how it's controlled, and document that, should you have that type of requirement. All right, very good. Any other questions? Any other information we can help with? Well, Paul, did you have any more you wanted to provide? Any more input, thoughts?
No, not at this point. I think we used up our time.
Yep, we did use up our time. So do we want to, so thank you everybody for coming and joining us with the Power Lunch today. We appreciate your attendance. There, pause for the video. And now do you want to go into NetVPro after hours? Or not?
Yeah, stop the recording.
Yeah, stop the recording.